Shogun episode 8 was a pretty weird one. The first half, I was like, oh man, this show is really blue balling, and we're going to end up with a bunch of stuff jammed into the last two episodes. But then the second half really ramped it up and started to reveal the bigger picture. There'll be spoilers. So the first half of the episode is a lot of just kind of screwing around. Toranaga seems ill from the journey. They're in Edo to grieve for his son for 7 weeks. Not really much going on, plot-wise, it doesn't feel like. And in the second half, John and Yabushige team up. Toranaga lets his second in command kill himself as part of his plan. He gets Mariko involved in it. So it really ramps up the second half of the episode. Although I will say, it does still feel like there's a lot we had to fit into these last two. So we'll see. So right away, we get this little scene where John says that he's sorry about Toranaga's loss. And Toranaga just walks off. And I really like this because when you first see it, you're kind of like, oh, he's just annoyed with him. But then by the end of the episode, it makes a lot more sense that he's playing everything super close to the chest, presumably like he has been all season. And it makes it much more clear by the end of the episode that a lot of these little scenes are subtle manipulation tactics for the bigger plan. Mariko gives him his books back for the completion of his service, and pretty much he's dismissed. He asks what's going to happen to Toranaga and his translator, and she says that her duty compels her to follow him, which is obviously in line with her attitude the entire season. This episode is called Chapter 8, The Abyss of Life. I think what it means essentially is that it's just another way of saying that they don't value life at all, and they're willing to throw lives away pretty much endlessly. And this has obviously been one of the main themes of the show the whole season. It's been one of the things that's been driving John crazy all season. And at least for like 80% of this episode, it seems like Toranaga is committed to what everyone around him views as throwing lives away. So that's how I took this title. So one of the first scenes we get is Ishido proposing to Ochiba. And obviously her being the heir's mother gives her a ton of influence. He's kind of done a power grab. So these two getting married would pretty much centralize all the power to these two, politically speaking. And I can't tell if he's doing this just for security or because he doesn't really trust her or he doesn't want people questioning his claim since the heir is still alive. There's a whole bunch of reasons that he could be doing this. But the only thing that he kind of says is vaguely, our bond will be stronger if our intentions are made public. So I think there's a lot of ways that you could take it. So we go to a little viewing thing. They're all kind of talking. Toranaga's not there because he's sick. John made a comment that at least Nagakato died fighting. And this seems to be kind of a common sentiment in the Toranaga camp. Some of them show up to his son's ceremony in a few minutes, wearing their armor in protest and that sort of thing. You can see here Omi's talking about how Toranaga's chosen to surrender, and he's pretty much sending them all to their death with no resistance. So everyone around him is frustrated. And you can see we're at the ceremony, and Yabushige is like, my nephew's young, but he's right about the stuff he was saying, that even Toranaga's generals are wearing their armor in protest. And I think this might be kind of why the first half of the episode felt like it dragged a bit, is because typically the show is pretty good about making a point, either openly or pretty subtly, but the story keeps going, the characters keep going. This one was one of the first times that it felt like it was really harping on this sentiment just kind of over and over and everybody's frustrations, which they've been frustrated for like 2.5 episodes now. So it sort of feels like it's just been really stretched out in this episode. And here we see Nagakata's body's being burned during their ceremony, and Toranaga's watching from the distance. He's supposed to be sick. I can't tell if he actually is, or if he's kind of sick and playing it up, or if he's just completely faking. It seems to me like he's kind of sick, but then really leaning into it to make himself appear as weak as possible, presumably right before he strikes in the next couple episodes. And I think this sets up for something pretty interesting later, where Toranaga says out loud to himself that he's grieving his son's loss, but he did buy him time. I'm curious to see how people perceive Toranaga after this episode, because I think most people would view him as the protagonist and kind of in the right. But in this episode, we see him use his own son's death as part of his plot. We see him let his friend Hiromatsu, who's his second in command and like lifelong friend, kill himself in order to make things happen that he wants. It seems like they're both in on it, and Hiromatsu understood that it was necessary. But even still, it's pretty cold-blooded and just calculated decision-making. And I wonder if people's perception of Toranaga will be changed after this episode. Here we get a quick scene where Mariko is asking Ochiba's sister if she's heard from her. And she said only a letter saying that if we surrendered, my family would be spared. And that's kind of it. And then Buntaro asks Mariko if he can make tea for her. And here we see, after John talked to Toranaga, he's having this conversation in Japanese. There's still some miscommunication, but he's learned enough of the language to get around on his own a bit. And the Portuguese father comes up and talks to him and tries to correct him. but he's saying that he wants charcoal, not more firewood. So it's a nice little scene just to show that their rivalry still exists and that John is somewhat blending into Japanese society, which is going to be important as part of the choices that he makes later on. And it's funny, they take some little jabs at each other verbally, where John says there's Catholics everywhere, like cockroaches, and the Portuguese guy says, it's strange that you're out here. Normally the Hakamoto is given confines within the Lord's area or whatever, instead of outside of it. So kind of both taking shots at each other there. And he wants to know what his plans are. And John says, maybe I'll go pay that black ship a visit that you guys are so proud of. But John's main focus as of yet is still to get his crew and boat back, which is obviously going to change in a little bit here. And this is kind of an interesting little scene because Toranaga says, I don't trust him to speak in Japanese anymore. Mariko translate for him and let him speak in his own tongue. And essentially he's pissed off that the Portuguese guy couldn't get any of the Christian lords to his side. But what it boils down to is that Toranaga does end up giving him the church as he promised. Although he's a bit trolly with it, which is funny. He ends up putting the church land right next to where the retired courtesan home would be, or the tea house, or whatever you want to call it. He also suggests trying to form an alliance with Ochiba, essentially because of the value of her with the heir. And Toranaga pretty much says she'd rather see my head in a box buried underground than ever work with me. And him and Hiramatsu get into it a little bit here, which I'm assuming is just all part of their bigger plan, which is for Toranaga 100% of the time to say that he doesn't want to be Shogun, that he's committed to surrendering, that he wants to protect the lives of Japan. And all the while, this makes everyone around him push him to fight, and it makes it seem like the throne and the power is being thrust upon him, when really it seems to me like he's manipulating them into this movement. And this is an interesting little conversation too, where Hiramatsu talks to Yabushige, and he's like, he's definitely going to fight. And Yabushige says, how do you know? And he says, because he wouldn't have trusted the Portuguese guy with the message for Ishido. He would have sent someone that he actually trusts. So really, everyone here just keeps believing that there is some bigger plan, and Toranaga just keeps denying it full stop, which obviously seems to be part of the bigger plan. So this scene is interesting because Buntaro is trying to be nice to Mariko and make her tea, and he proposes them dying together in protest. And she says that she would rather live for 1,000 years than die with him like that. And he's really confused, and she explains flat out, like, I wanted to escape from you, not life necessarily. He looks pretty distraught by it, but it's pretty rough that she's just like, I want to die to escape you, and now that you want to die, I'm not going to die with you. Like, I just want to be away from you. And the acting in the scene is all really good too, because Buntaro goes from like kind of happy to be able to give her what he thinks she wants, to like caught off guard, to upset, and then he finally breaks once she leaves him. And she kind of tears up a little bit too when she's saying everything she needs to. It's a really well done scene. I think I'm just kind of tired of their relationship at this point. But this looks like the end of it either way, so maybe the timing was just right. John can finally go get the rest of his crew in the boat. He finds out there's about half a dozen left. And when he says that he wants to go home, the guy says no. And then he accuses him of navigating them for essentially glory and to go down in history as the first Englishman to travel to these different parts of the world. You know, John says that they had orders, and the guy says that the orders died with the captain. And the guy's like giving him a hard time about his clothing. John notices how bad they all smell. So at this point, John has gotten further away from home than he realized. And as much as he hates it, it seems like he'd rather be in Japan. And this is a pretty big turning point for him character-wise, because obviously for 8 episodes, he's been trying to go home. And now that his crew doesn't want to go home, he has to make a choice. And his choice ends up being to try to work with Yabushige and escape. This guy ends up getting into a fist fight with John. John beats him up and throws the robes at him and just leaves. It's pretty clear from this interaction that none of those other guys are going to want to go with him or trust him. So he's lost his crew. So John now is pretty much begging Yabushige to let him sail under his banner and give him free reign with his ship to do trade and whatever else, since Toranaga won't let him attack on his behalf. And he has a pretty good line in here where Mariko says, you wish for this. And he says, I do not wish for it. He is a shitface. But he is a brave shitface. Pretty much he's trying to entice Yabushige with a way for them both to live and not just die what he views as a pointless death because Toranaga is surrendering. John takes his sword off and he says, this weapon doesn't suit me, and I've kind of felt embarrassed carrying it around, and it's not my weapon, and that he knows he doesn't belong here, but now his own people are strange to him as well. So pretty much he belongs nowhere, and he's trying to create a path for himself to survive. And they go back and forth for a while. Yabushige pretty much says, I'm loyal to Toranaga. I believe he has a plan, and that's the end of it. And Mariko has a pretty good line here where she says, loyalty lasts forever, otherwise it's not loyalty. And John says, yeah, but it's senseless if the mission becomes suicide. And then she asks if he wants that translator, if that was just for her. And that's a really interesting line because it's, again, just really reflective of how different the worldviews are. That she views loyalty as absolute, even if it's suicide. And he views it as conditional. Like at some point, there are things that override loyalty. I guess it depends on what your own view is, what you think is right. I think there's truth in what they're both saying. So it's a pretty interesting line and little back and forth that they have there. But this is all a really important scene for what's about to happen in like 10 minutes for Yabushige in particular. So we get a little cutaway. They're looking at their plot of land for their tea house, and the father is looking at his little plot of land for the church. I find this pretty funny that Toranaga did this, that he put the retired courtesans right next to the church. But he kept his word. So to me, I took this as kind of a fuck you to the Portuguese guy. This is another scene that I found really interesting and I think really different from anything you'd see today in modern context, where the Taiko's widow has a stroke and she's dying, and Ochiba is taking care of her. And because she had helped Ochiba get pregnant with the heir, she refers to him as what we created, or like our kid. So it's just a really strange dynamic to see essentially a widow being so close to a concubine. But I guess in this era, it probably would have been commonplace, especially for the nobles and that sort of thing. But we get to see a little bit of humanity from Ochiba. She takes care of her. It seems like she actually does really give a shit about her. And earlier, Mariko said that she thinks that the enemy of Ochiba is fear, not Toranaga, before he shot down even trying an alliance with her. I think we get to see a little bit of that here. And this is a really intense scene where Toranaga is having all of his high-up vassals sign over their surrender and stop the protest. One of his advisors stops the boy taking the paper around for signatures and protest. And they get into a really heated thing here where he's like, if we just stay in Edo, Ishida will have to attack us here and we can just defend. Like if we go to Ishida, we have no chance. Even now, Toranaga is saying what's more important, like protecting the lives of the Japanese people or ourselves. Matsu takes over here and they yell at each other and it's really pretty intense and heated. Eventually Matsu says, I'll commit seppuku since I'm not following your orders or your will if you really are going through with this. And this all seems like it was planned ahead of time and it's brutal to watch. And eventually Toranaga says, my decision's final, make yours now. And Matsu says, so you do believe in pointless death, kind of calling him out because Toranaga keeps preaching about not wasting lives. And the acting in this scene is really good from both of them. There's a lot of little subtle facial movements they're doing. Toranaga looks like he's really having a hard time holding back his emotions. And it's a scene where it both seems like they both know what they have to do, but neither of them wants to, but it's necessary. So it's just really well done. And eventually Matsu does do what he's supposed to and makes Buntaro be his second. And this is a nice little thing because we saw them talking about the second a couple episodes ago, how the guy made Toranaga do it when he was a boy and it took 9 swings. And obviously when we see Buntaro do it here, it's 1 clean swing. Buntaro tells his dad, I'm going to go next. And he says, no, like you're going to know what it's like to be denied and you're going to live like tough shit. So he makes his own son be his second, which is just brutal. And here you can see Hiroyuki Sanada's reaction to watching his best friend do this. It's really good, but it is definitely hard to watch. And then we see here Toranaga finally reveals that this was all something that he intended. And he asks if John has gone to Yabushige yet. And she says, yeah, but he said no. And Toranaga says after today, he'll say yes. So he let his best friend die just to get people moving the way that he wanted them to, which I think makes him a really interesting character. But I do wonder if people are going to stop rooting for him. I guess it really depends on how it ends, though, which I don't know the answer to. And then we get another little callback to the birds that they've been using all season. And he compares John and Yabushige to the hawks, that they're very predictable and kind of short-tempered and impulsive. It can be manipulated if you know how to use them right. And now he asks Mariko if she wants to do her part, which obviously she says yes. We get a quick scene here, and it looks like Ochiba accepted the marriage proposal from Ishido. There's no dialogue or anything. He just smiles, and she bows. So we cut, and as Toranaga said, Yabushige allied with John because Yabushige's been looking out for his own head all season. Pretty in line with his character. And John's still learning Japanese. He learned the word for allies. Mariko shows up as expected, and she's headed with them to Osaka, and they realize that they've been played. But too late. We finish up with Toranaga saying he won't waste the time that they gave him, and he looks like he's preparing for a domain expansion. And that's where it ends. So yeah, this was a strange episode. I feel like it was really backloaded. There was some okay character stuff in the first half, but the pacing in that part definitely felt slow and dragged out to me and kind of rehashing a lot of the stuff we've seen. The second half of the episode felt very productive, and obviously I'm hoping that we start getting to the action next episode because we only have 2 left now. And I would hate if they used all this time on character stuff and then ran out of time for the payoffs, especially when some of it has felt a little bit slower and more methodical. But I don't want to go too long on this one. If you watched the episode, let me know what you thought. I try to respond to all the comments, like and subscribe and all that. Thanks. See ya.